The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Presidio, Texas, and Rebecca Zimmerman pressed her palm against the rough wooden seat to steady herself, her fingers trembling not from the journey, but from the memories that clawed at her mind with every mile that brought her closer to this dusty border town in the summer of 1873. She stepped down onto the sun-baked earth, squinting against the brutal heat that shimmered off the desert landscape, and told herself that running halfway across the country would be enough to outrun the past that had taught her men were nothing but liars wrapped in charming smiles. The town sprawled before her like a collection of weathered bones bleaching under the relentless Texas sun. Adobe buildings mixed with wooden structures, their paint peeling in long strips that curled like dried leaves. Mexican voices mingled with English in the dusty streets, and the Rio Grande flowed somewhere beyond the buildings, a ribbon of precious water in this harsh landscape, where everything seemed designed to break a person down. Rebecca adjusted her bonnet and gripped her single carpetbag, surveying the town with eyes that had learned to see danger in every shadow. At 22, she had already survived more than most women twice her age, and the scars on her soul ran deeper than any physical wound. Her father had been a drunk who used his fists more than his words. The man she had nearly married back in St. Louis had smiled sweetly while emptying her savings and vanishing into the night. Every man she had ever trusted had proven that trust was a foolish luxury she could not afford. But she needed work, and Presidio offered opportunities for a woman willing to teach. The town needed a schoolteacher, and Rebecca needed distance from everything she had known. It seemed like a fair exchange, though she suspected nothing in this world was ever truly fair. "Miss Zimmerman." A woman's voice cut through her thoughts. Rebecca turned to find a plump Mexican woman with kind eyes and gray threading through her dark hair. "I am Senora Martinez. The town council asked me to meet you and show you to the schoolhouse." Rebecca nodded, managing a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. I appreciate your kindness." As they walked through the dusty streets, Senora Martinez chatted about the town, about the children who would be Rebecca's students, about the small room attached to the schoolhouse that would serve as her home. Rebecca listened with half her attention, the other half cataloging exits and evaluating every person they passed. Old habits died hard, and survival had taught her to always know where the dangers lurked. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple adobe structure with a bell hanging from a wooden post outside. The room inside was sparse but clean, with rough benches for the students and a desk that wobbled when Rebecca tested it. The attached living quarters consisted of a small room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a stove that looked like it had seen better days. "It is not much," Senora Martinez said apologetically, "but it is yours." "It is more than enough," Rebecca replied, and she meant it. Privacy was a luxury, and this room with its single door she could lock represented safety in a way no grand house ever had. After Senora Martinez departed with promises to return with supplies, Rebecca unpacked her meager belongings and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. This was freedom, she reminded herself. This was the life she had chosen, where she answered to no one and trusted no one and therefore could never be hurt again. The sound of wagon wheels crunching over gravel drew her to the window. She peered through the dusty glass and saw a wagon loaded with firewood pulling up outside. The man driving it was not like any man she had seen before. He was massive, with shoulders that seemed to span half the wagon seat and arms thick with muscle that flexed as he handled the reins. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin and looked like he had stepped out of a story about the mountain men who trapped beaver in the Rockies. Rebecca's instinct was to step back from the window, to hide until he left. But he had already seen her, and he was climbing down from the wagon with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size. She met him at the door, keeping one hand on the frame and her body positioned to slam it shut if needed. "Madam." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel tumbling in a stream. "Name is Gideon Irving. The town council hired me to bring you firewood for the winter months and to do any repairs the schoolhouse might need." Rebecca studied him warily. His eyes were a startling blue beneath heavy brows, and they met hers with a directness that made her want to look away. But she had learned never to show weakness, so she held his gaze. "Winter is months away. Wood needs to season, better to stack it now." He gestured toward the wagon. "If you tell me where you want it, I will get it unloaded and be out of your way." She pointed to the side of the building, eager to have him gone. But as she watched him work from the safety of her window, she found herself oddly fascinated. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had spent his life doing hard labor, lifting logs that would have required two normal men and stacking them with care. His shirt stretched tight across his back, and she could see the play of muscles beneath the fabric. When he finished, he knocked on her door again. She opened it just wide enough to be polite. "All done, madam. I also noticed your stovepipe has a crack. I can fix it tomorrow if that suits you." "That is not necessary," Rebecca said quickly. The thought of him returning, of establishing any kind of pattern, made anxiety flutter in her stomach. "It is necessary if you do not want smoke filling your room come winter," he said, but his tone was not insistent, just matter of fact. "But it is your choice." "I will not come unless you want me to." Something in the way he said it, acknowledging her right to refuse, made Rebecca pause. "I suppose the stovepipe should be fixed," he nodded. "I will come by tomorrow afternoon then. Good evening, Miss Zimmerman." He knew her name. Of course he did. In a town this size, everyone would know about the new schoolteacher before she had even arrived. Rebecca watched him climb back onto his wagon and drive away, and she told herself the strange feeling in her chest was nothing more than indigestion from the travel rations she had eaten. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Presidio settling into darkness, Rebecca thought about Gideon Irving despite her best efforts not to. He had been polite, respectful, and had kept his distance, but that meant nothing. Her former fiancé had been polite too, right up until the moment he had taken everything and disappeared. She would not make that mistake again. The next afternoon, Gideon returned with his tools. Rebecca had spent the morning cleaning the schoolhouse and arranging the few books the town had provided, trying not to think about his promised visit. When he knocked, she opened the door and stepped back to let him enter, though every muscle in her body tensed at having him in her small space. "This should not take long," he said, moving to examine the stovepipe. He worked quietly, and Rebecca tried to busy herself with organizing her desk, but she found her eyes drifting to him. His hands, despite their size, worked with surprising delicacy, removing the damaged section of pipe and fitting a new piece into place. "You live in town?" she asked, then immediately wondered why she had spoken. "No, madam. I have a cabin up in the mountains, about half a day's ride north. I come to Presidio when I need supplies or when folks need work done." He did not look at her as he spoke, keeping his attention on his task. "You prefer the solitude. I prefer the quiet. The mountains do not ask much of a man except that he pay attention and respect what is bigger than himself." He tested the pipe connection, nodded in satisfaction, and began gathering his tools. "All fixed. Should last you through many winters." Rebecca walked him to the door, and this time when he tipped his hat to her, she noticed the small gesture seemed genuine rather than performative. "Thank you, Mr. Irving. "What do I owe you?" "The town council already paid me, madam. You owe me nothing." After he left, Rebecca sat at her table and pressed her hands against the worn wood. Her heart was beating faster than it should, and she hated that she had noticed the way his voice softened when he spoke about the mountains, the way his large hands had been so careful with the delicate work of fitting the pipe. She had sworn off noticing such things. Noticing led to hoping, and hoping led to the kind of pain that left scars. The school term began 2 weeks later, and Rebecca threw herself into teaching with a fervor that left little room for other thoughts. Her students ranged from 6 to 14, a mix of Anglo and Mexican children whose parents wanted them to learn reading and arithmetic. Some came eagerly, others with reluctance, but Rebecca was a good teacher despite her wariness of the world. She knew how to make lessons interesting, how to be firm but fair, and the children responded to her dedication. Gideon appeared occasionally, always with some task the town council had assigned him. He fixed a broken bench, replaced rotted boards in the schoolhouse floor, and brought more supplies as Rebecca requested them. Each time he was polite, efficient, and respectful of her space. He never lingered, never tried to make unnecessary conversation, and never gave her any reason to fear him, which only made her more nervous, because she did not know what to do with a man who did not fit her expectations of how men behaved. One afternoon in late September, when the brutal heat had finally begun to ease into something merely uncomfortable, Rebecca heard shouting from the direction of town. She stepped outside to see what the commotion was about, and saw a group of men gathered near the general store. The tension in their voices carried across the distance, though she could not make out the words. Senora Martinez hurried past, and Rebecca called out to her. "What is happening?" "Bandits hit the Murphy ranch last night, stole horses, and shot Tom Murphy when he tried to stop them. The men are forming a posse to go after them." Senora Martinez shook her head. More violence, always more violence. Rebecca felt the familiar clench of fear in her stomach. Violence had been her childhood companion, and she had hoped that distance would mean safety. But apparently, safety was an illusion no matter where you ran. She tried to return to preparing her lessons, but her concentration was fractured. When hoofbeats sounded outside an hour later, she looked up to see Gideon dismounting from a large roan horse. He had a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle and a knife at his belt, and for the first time he looked dangerous. He knocked, and she opened the door with her heart hammering. "Miss Zimmerman, I wanted to let you know I am riding out with the posse. We should be back in a few days, but while we are gone, I have asked Senora Martinez to check on you. If you need anything, she will know where to find help." "I can take care of myself," Rebecca said, lifting her chin. "I am sure you can, madam, but it never hurts to have friends nearby." His blue eyes searched her face. "You look pale. Are you feeling well?" "I am fine." The lie came automatically. She was not fine. The thought of armed men riding out to chase other armed men brought back memories of her father coming home drunk and violent after getting into fights at the saloon. Gideon was quiet for a moment, then he did something unexpected. He took a step back, increasing the distance between them. "I know I am a stranger to you, and you have no reason to trust my word, but I give it to you anyway. While I am part of this town's community, no harm will come to you that I can prevent. That is not a claim on you or an expectation of anything in return. It is just the truth." Before Rebecca could respond, he was back on his horse and riding toward the gathered posse. She watched him go, her mind spinning. He had seen her fear, and instead of dismissing it or demanding she explain it, he had simply acknowledged it and given her space. The posse was gone for 3 days, and Rebecca spent those days teaching her students while trying not to think about the violence playing out somewhere in the desert. Senora Martinez did indeed check on her, bringing food and conversation that Rebecca accepted with cautious gratitude. When the posse returned, they had recovered the stolen horses but not caught the bandits, who had disappeared across the Rio Grande into Mexico. Tom Murphy was still alive, recovering slowly from his wound, and the town settled back into its routine with the resigned acceptance of people who knew violence was simply part of life in this harsh land. Gideon came by the schoolhouse the day after his return. He looked tired, with dust coating his clothes and new lines around his eyes, but he was whole and unharmed. "Just wanted to let you know we are back," he said from the doorway, not stepping inside, "and to see if anything needs fixing while I am in town." "Nothing needs fixing," Rebecca said, then surprised herself by adding, "but thank you for checking." Something shifted in his expression, a subtle softening that might have been a smile beneath the beard. "You are welcome, madam." As autumn deepened and the air finally cooled, Gideon's visits became more frequent, always with some legitimate reason. He brought wood for the schoolhouse stove. He fixed a shutter that had come loose in a windstorm. He delivered supplies the town council had ordered. Each time he was respectful and professional, but Rebecca began to notice small things. The way he always positioned himself so that she stood between him and the door, giving her an escape route. The way he never made sudden movements around her. The way he spoke in that low, steady voice that never rose in anger or impatience. It was as though he was gentling a wild horse, and Rebecca was not sure whether to be offended or touched. One afternoon in October, she was sweeping the schoolhouse steps when a scorpion scuttled across the threshold. She jumped back with a startled cry, and the broom clattered from her hands. Gideon, who had been unloading supplies from his wagon, was at her side in an instant. "Are you hurt?" His voice was sharp with concern. "No, I am fine. Just startled." She felt foolish for her overreaction, but her heart was still racing. Gideon picked up the broom and dispatched the scorpion with a quick, efficient movement, then swept it off the steps. They come inside looking for warmth as the weather cools. You need to check your shoes before putting them on in the morning and shake out your bedding. I will remember that. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, embarrassed by her reaction. Gideon studied her face, then said quietly, "Fear is not foolishness, Miss Zimmerman. It is your mind trying to keep you safe. Do not apologize for it." She met his eyes, startled by his perception. "You barely know me. How can you possibly understand?" "I know what it looks like when someone has learned to be afraid." He held her gaze steadily. "And I know it takes a lot of courage to keep going despite that fear. You came all the way to Presidio by yourself, and you are building a life here. That is not something a weak person does." Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the wall she had built around herself. She looked away, blinking against unexpected tears. "I should finish cleaning." "I will leave you to it then." Gideon returned to his wagon, but before he climbed up he said, "If you ever want to talk, Miss Zimmerman, I am a good listener. The mountains taught me that." He left before she could respond, and Rebecca stood on the steps watching his wagon disappear down the road. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart, and wondered what was happening to her. That night, for the first time since arriving in Presidio, she allowed herself to think about Gideon Irving not as a potential threat, but as a person. She thought about the gentle way he spoke, the care he took with his work, the respect he showed her boundaries. She thought about his eyes, blue as a mountain sky, and the way they seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. And she thought about how terrifying it was to feel the first tentative stirrings of trust. Winter arrived in earnest by November, bringing cold nights and occasional rain that turned the streets to mud. Rebecca kept the schoolhouse warm with the firewood Gideon had brought, and she found herself listening for the sound of his wagon with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. He came less frequently now, as the mountain passes grew difficult and he needed to prepare his own cabin for winter. But when he did come, he always stopped by the schoolhouse, always with some small offering. A handful of pecans he had traded for. A rabbit he had snared, already cleaned and ready for cooking. Once, a book of poetry that he said he had finished and thought she might enjoy. "You read poetry?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged face into something almost boyish. "The mountains are beautiful, but they do not offer much conversation. Books help fill the silence." "What is your favorite?" She held the book carefully, aware that in this rough country books were precious. "Whitman," he said without hesitation. "He writes about the wild places like he understands them, like he knows they are not empty but full of everything that matters." Rebecca opened the book and found a page marked with a piece of dried grass. The poem was "When I Heard the Learned Astronomer," and someone had underlined the final lines about looking up in perfect silence at the stars. The handwriting was careful and precise, not what she would have expected from a mountain man. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will take good care of it." "Keep it," Gideon said. "I have read it enough times to have it memorized." After he left, Rebecca sat by her stove and read the entire book of poetry, and with each page, she felt like she was learning something about the man who had given it to her. He was not what he appeared to be, this giant with the gentle voice. He was deeper and more complex, and that made him more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart than any smooth-talking charmer could have been. December brought a cold snap that was unusual for the region, and with it came news that had the town buzzing. A family traveling to El Paso had broken a wagon axle a few miles outside Presidio, and they were stranded with 3 young children and no shelter. The men of the town organized a rescue party, and Gideon was among them. Rebecca heard about it from her students, who were excited by the drama of a rescue. She tried to focus on teaching, but her mind kept wandering to Gideon out in the cold, and she hated that she cared. The rescue party returned before nightfall, bringing the family safely to town. Senora Martinez took them in, and the town rallied to provide food and assistance. Rebecca contributed what she could, and that evening she found herself at the Martinez home with several other townspeople, helping to prepare a meal for the rescued family. Gideon was there too, and for the first time, Rebecca saw him in a social setting. He was quiet, standing at the edge of the gathering, but the other men treated him with clear respect. When the children from the rescued family were frightened and crying, it was Gideon who knelt down to their level and spoke to them in that low, steady voice until they calmed. Rebecca watched him from across the room, saw the patience in his movements and the kindness in his eyes, and felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. She slipped outside for air, needing to escape the confusing emotions swirling inside her. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. She wrapped her shawl tighter and tried to steady her breathing. "Are you well, Miss Zimmerman?" She turned to find Gideon standing in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "I just needed air. It was too crowded inside." He nodded and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. Crowds can be overwhelming. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Rebecca heard herself say, "Why are you so kind to me?" Gideon turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Why would I not be?" Most men want something in return for kindness. Then they are not being kind, they are making an investment. He moved closer, but not too close, respecting the space between them. "I do not want anything from you, Miss Zimmerman. I just want you to feel safe." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because the first time I saw you, standing in that doorway looking like you expected the world to hurt you, I recognized something. I have seen wild creatures with that same wariness, the ones that have been trapped or hunted. And I know that you cannot force trust. You can only earn it, one gentle moment at a time." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "You do not know what has happened to me." "I do not need to know the details to see the scars, Rebecca." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it made her shiver. "I have my own scars, different maybe, but just as real. Will you tell me?" She did not know where the question came from, but suddenly she needed to know. Gideon looked up at the stars, his breath misting in the cold air. "I was married once when I was young and foolish. Her name was Sarah, and I loved her the way young men love, with my whole heart and no sense. We had a farm in Missouri and we were building a life. Then the war came. Rebecca waited, sensing there was more. I joined up, fought for 3 years. When I came back, everything was gone. The farm was burned and Sarah had died of fever while I was away. There was nothing left of the life we had planned." His voice was steady, but she could hear the old pain beneath it. "I drifted for a while after that, not caring much about anything. Eventually found my way to the mountains and they gave me peace. Taught me that some things endure, even when everything else falls apart." "I am sorry," Rebecca said and meant it. "It was a long time ago. I made my peace with it." He looked at her again. "But it taught me that life is fragile and precious, and when you find something worth caring about, you need to be gentle with it." Rebecca felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "I do not know how to trust Gideon. Every man I have ever trusted has hurt me." "Then I will wait until you are ready, and if you are never ready, I will still wait." His words were simple and utterly sincere. "You are worth waiting for, Rebecca Zimmerman." She stepped closer to him, and this time when the space between them narrowed, it was her choice. "What if I want to try? What if I am tired of being afraid? Then we go slow as you need." Gideon reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently took her hand. His palm was rough and calloused, but his touch was careful. "Is this all right?" Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, at the way her small fingers disappeared into his large ones, and nodded. Her heart was pounding, but it was not entirely from fear. "Yes." They stood together under the stars, holding hands, and Rebecca felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified and exhilarated at the same time. From that night forward, something changed between them. Gideon still came to town with his work and his offerings, but now Rebecca allowed herself to look forward to his visits. She began to trust that when he said he would come, that when he made a promise, he kept it. He courted her with the patience of a man who understood that healing took time. He brought her small gifts, a carved wooden bird, a smooth stone from a mountain stream, a bundle of wildflowers that somehow still bloomed in the winter valleys. He asked her about her day and listened with genuine interest to her stories about her students. He told her about the mountains, painting pictures with words of forests and streams and the profound silence of falling snow. And slowly, so slowly that Rebecca barely noticed it happening, she began to trust him. Christmas came, and the town celebrated with a small gathering at the church. Rebecca attended, and when Gideon asked if he could sit beside her, she said yes. His presence was warm and solid beside her, and when their shoulders brushed, she did not pull away. After the service, he walked her back to the schoolhouse through the cold night. At her door, he paused. "I have something for you." He pulled a small package from his coat and handed it to her. Rebecca unwrapped it carefully, and her breath caught. Inside was a leather-bound journal, beautiful and clearly expensive. "I thought you might like to write," Gideon said. "You have stories in you. I can see them in your eyes sometimes when you think no one is watching." Rebecca ran her fingers over the smooth leather, overwhelmed. "This is too much." "It is exactly right." He smiled at her. "I want you to have something beautiful that is yours alone." She looked up at him, this giant of a man who had been so patient with her, and made a decision. Rising on her toes, she pressed a gentle kiss to his bearded cheek. "Thank you, Gideon." His eyes widened with surprise and pleasure. "You are welcome, Rebecca." That night, she wrote in her new journal for the first time, and the words that flowed onto the page were about hope and healing, and the tentative joy of allowing herself to feel again. The new year of 1874 arrived with unseasonably warm weather, and with it came new challenges. A fever swept through Presidio in January, affecting primarily the children. Rebecca's schoolhouse became a makeshift infirmary as she helped Senora Martinez and the other women of the town care for the sick. Gideon arrived in town as soon as he heard, and he worked tirelessly alongside everyone else, fetching water, gathering medicinal herbs from the mountains, and sitting with the children through long nights when they were too restless to sleep. Rebecca saw a new side of him during those difficult weeks, his strength tempered with tenderness as he cradled sick children and spoke to them in that low, soothing voice. One night, when they were both exhausted from tending to the ill, they found themselves alone in the schoolhouse. Most of the children had been taken home as they recovered, and only 2 remained, sleeping peacefully in makeshift beds. Rebecca sat at her desk, her head in her hands, and felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Gideon appeared beside her with a cup of water. "Drink," he said gently. "You need to take care of yourself too." She accepted the cup gratefully and sipped the cool water. "I did not realize teaching would involve so much more than lessons." "You are more than a teacher to this town, Rebecca. You care about these children. They can feel it." Gideon knelt beside her chair so his eyes were level with hers. "You are making a difference here." "So are you." She reached out without thinking and touched his face, her fingers brushing against his beard. "You did not have to come help, but you did. I came because you were here." His voice was rough. "I would do anything for you, Rebecca. You must know that by now." She looked into his blue eyes and saw the truth there, saw the depth of feeling he had been holding back out of respect for her boundaries. And she realized that somewhere along the way, her fear had transformed into something else entirely. "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered, the words terrifying and liberating at the same time. Gideon closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they shone with emotion. "I have been in love with you since the day you stood in that doorway and tried so hard to be brave. I just did not think I would ever be allowed to tell you." Rebecca leaned forward, and this time when she kissed him, it was not on the cheek but on his lips, a tentative touch that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Gideon responded carefully, letting her control the kiss, his large hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. When they parted, Rebecca was breathless. "I am still afraid sometimes. I know, and that is all right. Fear does not disappear just because we want it to." Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "But I will spend every day showing you that you are safe with me. I will earn your trust again and again, for as long as you need." "I do trust you," Rebecca said, and realized it was true. "You earned it, Gideon. One gentle moment at a time, just like you said." They sat together in the quiet schoolhouse, holding each other while the children slept peacefully nearby. And Rebecca felt something she had never thought she would feel again: hope for the future. The fever eventually passed, and the town recovered. Rebecca's students returned to their lessons with renewed energy, and life settled back into its familiar rhythms. But everything was different now, because Rebecca and Gideon were different. Their courtship became official, acknowledged and accepted by the town. Gideon still spent most of his time in the mountains, but he came to Presidio more often now, and when he did, he and Rebecca were inseparable. They took walks along the Rio Grande in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his life before the war, about his family back east who he had not seen in years. He learned about her childhood, about the pain that had shaped her, and he listened without judgment or platitudes. On a warm evening in March, they sat on the bank of the river watching the sun set over Mexico, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been thinking," Gideon said carefully, "about the future." Rebecca's heart skipped. "What about it? I want you in mine. However you will have me, for however long you will have me." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know we have not been courting long, and I know you need time, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable and permanent. Are you asking me to marry you?" Rebecca's voice came out breathless. "Eventually, yes, when you are ready." Gideon took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But I am not going to rush you, Rebecca. This is too important to rush." She looked at their joined hands, thinking about how far she had come from the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 8 months ago. Thinking about how this man had patiently, persistently shown her that love did not have to hurt. "I want to marry you," she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. "I want to build a life with you, Gideon Irving." His face transformed with joy. "You are sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "You healed something in me I did not think could be healed. You showed me I could trust again." Gideon pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his broad chest. "I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that trust." They were married in May, in the small church in Presidio with the entire town in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple dress that Señora Martinez had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Gideon had gathered from the mountains. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears, and Rebecca felt her own tears fall as she realized she was not walking toward a life of fear and disappointment, but toward a future with a man who had proven his love through patient action. The vows they spoke were traditional, but when Gideon said, "I do," Rebecca heard all the unspoken promises beneath those words. "I will be gentle. I will keep you safe. I will earn your trust every single day." And when she said, "I do," she meant every word. Their wedding night was spent at the schoolhouse, which had been decorated by the women of the town with flowers and candles. Gideon carried her over the threshold and then set her down carefully, stepping back to give her space. "We can take this as slow as you need," he said, his voice gentle despite the desire she could see in his eyes. "There is no rush." Rebecca reached up to touch his face, this man who had been so patient with her broken heart. "I am not afraid, Gideon, not anymore." She kissed him, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. She trusted him completely, and in that trust she found freedom. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, and when Gideon held her afterward, his arms protective around her, Rebecca felt truly safe for the first time in her life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "My brave, beautiful wife." They spent the summer transitioning into married life. Rebecca continued teaching, though she knew she would need to give it up eventually when children came. Gideon divided his time between the mountains and Presidio, bringing furs to trade and taking jobs that kept him connected to the town. But as summer turned to autumn, they began making plans for a different future. Gideon's cabin in the mountains was too isolated for Rebecca's work, and the schoolhouse was too small for a growing family. They needed something in between. With help from the men of the town, they built a house on the outskirts of Presidio, close enough that Rebecca could still teach, but set apart enough to give them privacy. It was a simple structure, but Gideon built it with care, ensuring every beam was strong and every window was placed to catch the best light. Rebecca watched the house take shape, and with it, she watched her future taking form. This would be where they would raise their children, where they would grow old together. The thought filled her with a contentment she had never imagined possible. They moved into the new house in November, and Rebecca threw herself into making it a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted herbs in the small garden, and arranged their few possessions with care. Gideon built her a desk where she could write in the journal he had given her, and she filled pages with stories and observations and expressions of love for the man who had changed her life. That winter was cold but joyful. They spent evenings by the fire, reading to each other from books and talking about their dreams. Gideon spoke of teaching their future children to respect the land and the wild creatures that inhabited it. Rebecca spoke of filling the house with laughter and love, of creating the kind of family she had never had as a child. In February, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. When she told Gideon, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his laughter echoing through the house. "A child," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. Gideon set her down gently, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Rebecca. A reason to come down from the mountains, a home, and now a family. I did not think I would ever have these things again." She covered his hand with hers. "We gave them to each other." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Rebecca continued teaching until her condition made it impractical. The town found a temporary replacement, a young man fresh from the east who was eager to prove himself. Rebecca spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and arranging the cradle that Gideon had carved with his own hands. Gideon was fiercely protective during her pregnancy, worrying over every small discomfort and ensuring she had everything she needed. Rebecca sometimes teased him about his hovering, but she secretly loved the way he cared for her. "I cannot help it," he said one evening when she pointed out that he had asked 3 times in an hour if she was comfortable. "You are carrying the most precious thing in the world." "Things," Rebecca corrected, her hand on her swollen belly. "The midwife thinks there might be 2. Gideon's eyes widened. "Twins, possibly. She is not certain yet." Rebecca watched his face, trying to gauge his reaction. He knelt beside her chair and pressed his ear to her stomach, listening. 2 babies, twice the blessing. In September of 1874, Rebecca went into labor on a warm afternoon when the light slanted golden through the windows. Senora Martinez attended her, along with the town's midwife, and Gideon paced outside the bedroom like a caged mountain lion, desperate to help but knowing this was work he could not do. The labor was long and difficult, and more than once, Gideon wanted to burst through the door despite the women's orders to stay out. But finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the cry of a baby, and then another. Senora Martinez emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son and a daughter, Gideon, both healthy, and Rebecca as well." He did not wait for permission but rushed into the room. Rebecca lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, holding 2 tiny bundles against her chest. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "Meet your children," she said softly. Gideon sat carefully on the edge of the bed, afraid his large hands might somehow damage these impossibly small creatures. One baby had a shock of dark hair like his own, and the other was nearly bald with wisps of auburn like Rebecca's. "They are perfect," he whispered, touching each tiny head with a finger. "You are perfect." "What should we name them?" Rebecca asked. They had discussed names, but now that the babies were here, Gideon wanted to be sure. "The boy should be Samuel, after my father, if that suits you." "Samuel Irving, I like it." Rebecca looked down at the tiny girl. "And this little one should be Grace, because Grace is what brought us together." Samuel and Grace. Gideon carefully took his son from Rebecca, cradling the baby against his broad chest. Samuel was impossibly small in his arms, but Gideon held him with the same careful gentleness he had always shown Rebecca. "Welcome to the world, son. You are going to love the mountains." Rebecca laughed, exhausted but happy. "He has to grow a bit first. Then I will be patient." "I am good at that." Gideon smiled at her over their son's head. "Thank you, Rebecca, for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me a family again." "Thank you for waiting for me," she replied, "for earning my trust one gentle moment at a time." The twins thrived, growing from tiny newborns into sturdy infants with distinct personalities. Samuel was quiet and observant, his blue eyes taking in everything around him with serious contemplation. Grace was livelier, quick to laugh and demanding attention with lusty cries when she wanted something. Gideon was a devoted father, and watching him with their children healed something in Rebecca she had not even known was broken. He was patient and tender, never raising his voice, always gentle in his handling of the babies. He sang to them in his low, rumbling voice, and he spent hours simply holding them, marveling at the miracle of their existence. Rebecca returned to teaching part-time once the twins were old enough, bringing them with her to the schoolhouse in a double cradle Gideon had made. The students loved having the babies there, and the older girls competed for the privilege of helping care for them during breaks. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of quiet evenings and busy days. Gideon still went to the mountains occasionally, but never for long, always eager to return to his family. He taught Samuel and Grace about the natural world as they grew, showing them how to be gentle with creatures and respectful of the land. When the twins were 2 years old, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to another son in the spring of 1877, whom they named James. He had Gideon's sturdy build and Rebecca's green eyes, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt full of life and love. There was always noise, children laughing or crying, Gideon's low voice telling stories, Rebecca singing while she worked. It was everything Rebecca had never dared to dream she could have. On a summer evening when the twins were 4 and James was 1, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children played at their feet, and Gideon had his arm around Rebecca, pulling her close against his side. "You remember when we first met?" Rebecca asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember a woman standing in a doorway, looking like she expected the world to hurt her," Gideon said. "And I remember thinking I wanted to show her it did not have to be that way. You did more than show me." Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had been so patient with her wounded heart. "You healed me, Gideon. You taught me that trust is possible, that love can be gentle." "You healed me too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live again." Grace toddled over and climbed into Rebecca's lap, and Samuel followed, wanting to be close to his father. James was already half asleep in Gideon's arms, his thumb in his mouth and his eyes drooping. Rebecca looked at her family, at the children she had brought into the world and the man who had shown her that love did not have to hurt, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She had come to Presidio running from her past, expecting nothing but solitude and safety. Instead, she had found everything she had never dared to hope for. "I love you," she said to Gideon, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," he replied, "always and forever." The children grew, and with them, the family's joy multiplied. Samuel became fascinated with the mountains like his father, eager to learn about tracking and survival. Grace showed a talent for teaching, often gathering her younger brother and the neighbor children to play school. James was the wild one, always exploring and getting into mischief that reminded Gideon of himself as a boy. Rebecca eventually gave up teaching formally when the demands of 3 active children became too much, but she never stopped being a teacher. She taught her own children to read and write, to think critically and question the world around them. And she taught them, through her example and Gideon's, what real love looked like. As the years passed, the house filled with memories. First steps and first words, scraped knees and childhood illnesses, celebrations and quiet moments. Rebecca kept writing in her journal, documenting their life together. And sometimes when she read back over the early entries, she could hardly believe how much had changed. The frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Presidio was gone, replaced by someone stronger and happier. Not because her past had been erased, but because she had found someone who had helped her heal from it. Gideon's hair began to show threads of silver as the years went on, but he remained strong and vital, still working hard and still treating Rebecca with the same careful tenderness he had shown from the beginning. He never took her trust for granted, always conscious of the gift she had given him. When the twins turned 10 in 1884, Rebecca and Gideon took the entire family on a trip to the mountains. They packed supplies and rode out to Gideon's old cabin, which he had maintained over the years as a retreat. The children were enchanted by the wilderness, by the silence broken only by bird calls and the wind through the pines. Gideon taught them to fish in the cold mountain streams and to read the signs that animals left behind. Rebecca watched her family with contentment, thinking how perfect this was, how right. On the last night of their trip, after the children were asleep in the cabin, Rebecca and Gideon sat outside under the stars. The night was cool and clear, the sky brilliant with countless points of light. "Thank you for bringing me here," Rebecca said. "I understand now why you love it so much." "The mountains are peaceful," Gideon agreed, "but they are not home anymore. Home is wherever you are, Rebecca." She turned to him, seeing the starlight reflected in his eyes. "We have built a good life, have we not? The best life." Gideon took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern on her palm that he had traced 1,000 times before. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Do you ever regret it? Coming down from the mountains, taking on a wife and family?" "Never, not for a single moment." His voice was fierce with certainty. "You are my greatest adventure, Rebecca Irving. You and our children are everything that matters." She kissed him, this man who had earned her trust one gentle moment at a time, who had shown her that love could heal even the deepest wounds. "I used to think I would never trust any man, but you proved me wrong." "You trusted yourself," Gideon corrected. "You were brave enough to take a chance on me, even when everything in your past told you not to. That took more courage than anything I have ever done." They sat together under the mountain stars, holding hands and watching the night sky, surrounded by the quiet wilderness that had once been Gideon's only home. But now he had a better home, a fuller life, and it was all because a frightened woman had stepped off a stagecoach in Presidio, and he had decided to be patient. The family returned to Presidio at the end of the week, tanned and happy and full of stories. Life resumed its familiar rhythms, but the trip had strengthened the bonds between them, creating shared memories they would carry forever. More years passed. Samuel, at 16, began talking about becoming a guide, wanting to help others experience the wilderness safely. Grace, at 15, showed a talent for writing and filled notebooks with stories and observations. James, at 13, was still deciding what he wanted to be, trying on different dreams like he tried on his father's 2 large boots. Rebecca and Gideon watched their children grow with pride and occasional pangs of nostalgia for the babies they had been. But they also looked forward to the future, to grandchildren and new adventures. In 1890, on their wedding anniversary, Gideon took Rebecca back to the spot by the Rio Grande where he had first told her his intentions. The cottonwoods had grown taller, and the river still flowed steadily toward the Gulf, but some things remained the same. 16 years, Rebecca said, looking at the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. It feels like yesterday and like forever at the same time. The best 16 years of my life, Gideon said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden box. I made this for you. Rebecca opened it carefully and found a locket inside, delicate gold on a fine chain. Inside the locket were 2 tiny portraits, one of her and Gideon on their wedding day and one of their 3 children. It is beautiful, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Gideon fastened it around her neck, his large fingers surprisingly deft with the small clasp. I wanted you to have something that showed what we have built together, our family, our love. I already carry it with me always, Rebecca said, touching the locket, but I will treasure this. They stood together by the river, older now but still deeply in love, still committed to the gentle moments that had brought them together. Rebecca thought about the journey that had led her here, about the pain and fear that had once defined her life. And she thought about how Gideon had shown her a different way, through patience and kindness and unwavering devotion. You know what I realized, she said suddenly. What is that? I used to think trust was something you gave or withheld, a simple choice. But you taught me it is something that grows, like a plant that needs tending and care. You watered it with your actions, and you were patient enough to wait for it to bloom. Gideon pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. And you taught me that some things are worth waiting for. That the best things in life require patience and gentleness. They stood together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Rebecca felt the same sense of peace and rightness she had felt on their wedding day. This was where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had earned her trust, one gentle moment at a time. As the years continued to unfold, Rebecca and Gideon remained devoted to each other and their growing family. Samuel married a strong-willed young woman from El Paso and became a wilderness guide, teaching others to respect and love the mountains as his father had taught him. Grace became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in a small town further west. James found his calling as a rancher, building a successful operation with cattle and horses. Rebecca and Gideon became grandparents, and they delighted in the new generation of children who called them Nana and Papa. Their house, now older and showing the wear of years, was frequently filled with grandchildren running through the rooms and playing in the yard where their own children had once played. Gideon's hair turned fully silver, and Rebecca's auburn locks faded to gray, but they still held hands when they walked and still kissed each other goodbye when parted. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more enduring, a love built on decades of trust and commitment. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, just as they had done for years. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories and dreams. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, content in each other's presence. You ever think about that first day? Gideon asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "When you stepped off that stagecoach looking like you wanted to get right back on." Rebecca laughed, the sound still bright despite her years. "I think about it often. I was so afraid of everything, especially of men like you." "Men like me, strong, capable men who seemed too good to be true. I was convinced you had to have some hidden flaw, some secret cruelty." She squeezed his hand. "I am glad I was wrong." "I was terrified of you," Gideon admitted. "You looked so fragile, like you might break if I said the wrong thing. I had to learn how to be gentle all over again." "You were always gentle," Rebecca said. "That was what finally reached me. You never demanded anything, never pushed. You just waited. Best decision I ever made." Gideon lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Waiting for you." As they entered their 70s, age began to slow them down. Gideon's powerful frame became less imposing, his strength waning. Rebecca's hands grew stiff with arthritis, making writing in her journal difficult. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that had burned for decades. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1924, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at Samuel's ranch, with tables laden with food and music playing late into the night. Rebecca looked around at the family they had created, at the generations of love spreading out from the scared woman and patient man who had found each other in a dusty Texas town. She saw Samuel's strength and Grace's compassion and James's adventurous spirit, and she saw those same qualities reflected in her grandchildren. "We did well," she whispered to Gideon as they danced slowly to a gentle tune. "We did better than well," he replied. "We created something beautiful." That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the guest room Samuel had prepared for them, Rebecca and Gideon lay in bed holding hands as they had done for 50 years. "I love you," Rebecca said, as she had said countless times before. "I love you too," Gideon replied. "One gentle moment at a time for the rest of our days." They fell asleep together, and Rebecca's last thought before sleep claimed her was gratitude. Gratitude for the courage she had found to trust again. Gratitude for the patient man who had earned that trust, and gratitude for the beautiful life they had built together. Gideon lived to be 82, passing peacefully in his sleep with Rebecca at his side. She mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the incredible life they had shared. She lived for 3 more years, spending her final days surrounded by family, telling stories about the mountain man who had taught her to trust and love again. When Rebecca passed at 85, she was buried beside Gideon in the Presidio cemetery, their headstones side by side as they had been in life. Their children ensured that the inscription captured the essence of their love story: Rebecca and Gideon Irving. She had never trusted any man before him. He earned her trust one gentle moment at a time. Together, they built a love that endured. And in the hearts of their descendants, the story lived on. The story of a frightened woman who found the courage to trust, and a patient man who proved himself worthy of that trust. The story of a love that had healed old wounds and created new joy. The story of 2 people who had found each other in a harsh land and built something beautiful that would last for generations. Years after their passing, their great-great-grandchildren would visit the old house outside Presidio, now preserved as part of the family heritage. They would walk through the rooms where Rebecca and Gideon had raised their children, and they would feel the echoes of the love that had filled those spaces. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted golden through the windows just as it had in 1873, visitors to the house would swear they could feel a presence. Not frightening, but comforting. the presence of two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that transcended time itself. The mountain man and the woman who learned to trust. Together forever, one gentle moment at a time.